Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Rioch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil podcast, the business connection, the world's first English language internet program about business in Brazil since June 2000. I'm Tom Rioch, an American living in Brazil and known here as the king of networking, talking from my studio in Campinas, São Paulo. Today's guest is Carlos Monteiro. He's a Brazilian living in Denmark, more precisely the city of Odense. Carlos Monteiro is an expert in strategic partnerships, B2B commerce, e-commerce, and digital transformation. We actually met on LinkedIn many years ago, and Carlos is also a prolific writer and posts many articles on LinkedIn. So with that, Carlos, hello and welcome to Talk to Brazil.
Hello, Tom. Thanks very much for having me over.
Well, Carlos, it's been fun and actually very informative following you, your posts and your articles on LinkedIn. It's also a pleasure to be able to talk to you now. But what I first obviously want to ask you is why Denmark and how long have you been there?
Perfect. So long story short, I've been here now for 6.5 years. In 2009 and 2010, I used to work for the Danish consulate in Brazil as an intern. And there I met my ex-wife. We are divorcing now, but we've been married for 10 years. And about 6.5 years, we moved to Denmark. We've got two kids now, Inez and Cecilia, 7 and 5 years respectively. So,
And the drive is you wanted to get the international experience of working abroad?
Well, I moved to Denmark, again, like we always spoke about living abroad, right? Between and I. And so when our first daughter was born, we saw that as an opportunity as well. Katrina missed home very much. So as an opportunity to come back and have this sort of international experience and the Danish way.
And what do you think about the Danish way of life now that you've been there for 6 years?
I think it's fantastic. I think Danes are very simple in the way they live their life. Danes are very grounded. Danes are, in Denmark they have a rule. It can be a bit annoying for us sometimes, or difficult to understand at first, which is something that they call the Jante law, right? And Jante law is basically it's basically an unspoken rule that they have. So you have to so you become like a grounded person. So in Denmark, you're not really well seen if you say, let's say, you brag about your accomplishments, which is something more common in the U.S. I think than in Brazil. But in Brazil, also people like, in my opinion, bragging about their accomplishments or saying how good they are in certain stuff.
Right.
So in Danish culture, that's not something that is that they appreciate at all.
Right.
So I think they have a very simple way of living. They appreciate family very much, which we could say similar to Brazil.
Right.
But they are way more family oriented, in my opinion.
Right.
So I think it's very nice.
Well, I mentioned to you before we started, when I first came to Brazil and first started working here in Brazil, I worked actually with a Brazilian-Danish company and had the opportunity of visiting Denmark many times and visiting the city where you live, Odense, many times. And one of the things that struck me, exactly what you just said, and one of the things that even struck me more in terms of family, every time I would go out or be in the area, I always see people would have a very high flagpole in front of their house, and they were always flying flags. The Danish flag was always being flown somewhere. And one of the first things I asked, why the flags? Because obviously in the States, we reference our flag, the flag's up. But they said, no, if somebody has a birthday, they put the flag up.
Correct.
If somebody, they're christening a baby or had a baby, the flag goes up. So it's a symbol, exactly that what you just said. It's a symbol of the country. It's I would say a symbol of the patriotism. but it's also a very highly symbol of the family. Graduation, what have you. And I said, wow, that was it. So if somebody puts a flag up, on a Thursday, which is not a holiday, you can be sure that they're having a family event. And and that's something. Being in America or here in Brazil, you don't see that. In Brazil, you only see flags when there's a football game. And that's about it. But that's one of the things, and that family orientation is there. And every time I would visit on a business visit, it was very common to the business persons, invite me to their house and just be part of their normal, it wasn't a special dinner and everything, because every dinner there was special, but it was just the daily dinner. And, just welcome you and sit down, very friendly, very open. And that always struck me as, so I could see you could be very well adapted there. And that's the plus side, huh?
Yeah. I fully agree. And I think this simple way of living, so dinners are like, almost like religious, like are so important, because so you have the day to day, like in Denmark, in Europe, it's not common for us to have servants at home unless you're one of the super wealthy, right?
Right.
And people like when I tell them my background and how was my life in Brazil, they kind of like, were you rich? Because you had a maid.
Right.
It's like, no, it's not like that. But it's just another way of living. And here it's like super, super simple. So, from things like doing your own bed in the morning, or washing your own clothes. Like I got my CEO who's just sitting across me at the table here, and I, it's such a simple guy, like he's wearing.
Let's use it's simple in the sense of being non-complex, right?
Yeah, non-complex, not as in ordinary. I mean, the super intelligent guy,
right, very,
really bright, but like he's not a complex guy. He I asked him, can I use the room for a podcast that I have to join now? And he's like, are you asking me, dude? I mean, you know better. I said, okay. So sometimes
and they apply that to business. That's the way my business relationships have always been with Danes. It's very straightforward, very practical, and very literally above the table. Very transparent in all of their interactions, and that's striking.
Yeah, it is.
Well, take advantage and do say, while he's still there, say hello from Brazil, okay?
Right.
But what I want to get to, which is the part of our interview and what attracted me to, which is the second part, an article that I saw that you wrote in 2014. And the article was called Brazilians, Why We Are the Way We Are. And in that article, I'm going to read just a part of it. In that article, you wrote, if you're coming to do business in Brazil, you will probably notice in your business meetings that business will be one of the last topics Brazilians will talk about. They will ask something related to your trip, to your staying, or a football match that happened in the previous evening, and you should know beforehand that this is used as a warm-up. Then you said, differently than Scandinavians, Brazilians are less straight to the point. It doesn't mean that Brazilian businessmen are not serious, or even worse, that they don't take you or your topic seriously. Then you say, in fact, Brazilian businessmen will be quite serious about the business topics. However, if the environment surrounding the conversation can be lighter before engaging in a business conversation, Brazilians will appreciate a lot more the meeting, and your chances of success from a cultural perspective can surely be higher. So we're in 2020. Has anything changed, or do you think it's still the same?
That's a complex question. I'll try to...
No, think Danish and make it simple today. See, you have to be simple.
Yeah. But it is, because I think we have this sort of more complex Brazilians and people like, let's say, my father, who's in his 60s, right? And then I'll give you an example. So one day I get from Denmark, and I'm super tired, and my dad has a well-known business in his sector in Brazil. And then he says, Carlos, you got to join me to a meeting. And I was like, Dad, I had a 15-hour flight. What is this about?
Right.
And I think I've become very Dane over this past 6 years just because, you can't waste time. Time is the most precious asset that we have, right? So my dad says, no, I'm trying to buy the ERP, ERP system for my company because we're launching an e-commerce and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And we have a meeting with this guy. And so I get at the meeting, sit down with them, and then my dad is like the third meeting that he's having with this guy, trying to sell him like a simple system, like an ERP system to deploy the e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, my dad looks at me like we're half an hour on, and I just said, excuse me, guys, I need to ask you a question. Yeah. And then the guy, sure. How many times have you been here? Oh, this is our third meeting. And what is this about? So my dad just looks at me and I'm like, Dad, third time? You're just grilling the guys. What is this about? Guys, what is the price?
Right.
What's the price tag? Dad, you need an ERP. Are we going to close the deal or not? It's simple as that.
Right.
And then my dad just looked at me. The guys also didn't know what to say. They were younger. They wanted the deal.
Right.
The head of the project was the e-commerce manager at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was he was also frozen because in Brazil you have the sense of hierarchy, right? So which doesn't exist in Denmark pretty much unless you're in a very large enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad says, okay, we're moving forward. That only happened because I was really tired, like from this flight. So I said, Dad, I can't waste my time with this. You either eat this and you move forward, or you just dump the guys, and it's okay. It's also, it's also
move on, turn the page, do something.
Exactly. So there's this generation of let's say decision makers and maybe more conservative people in Brazil who need this chit chat and so on.
Right.
And then there's younger generation, who probably been traveling more. I think they've been also more exposed to the internet and stuff like that. And I noticed that there is a change. I still see like my friends, there's a lot of chit chat and so on, but they can be more straightforward and even so more transparent as well. Mm-hmm. That's some of the feelings that I've got from, I'm not saying that the older generation isn't transparent, but it's just another way of operating, if that makes sense.
No, that's true. And the talk, I don't want to just say the younger generation, but I'm going to say in the more modern technologies and in the what is happening today in Brazil, happening worldwide, but specifically here, with a large number of startups, a large number of the tech-type companies. And what is also happening, talk about the older generations, and I'm part of an older generation, but many of the persons I know who are ex-executives who worked for many years in structured companies, maybe persons similar to your father, I'm sure, and now they've found that they have to literally restart, or they're starting up a tech-type company. And when we're talking, I'm just to say tech type, where the practice is today, you have to have a 5-minute pitch. Because if a venture capitalist comes and wants to hear what you're doing, and he may not even come, he just may have a Skype call and say, you have 5 minutes to tell me about your company. And literally, I've seen, and you've seen that, I'm sure there, 5 minutes is 5 minutes.
It is.
And the expectation is that you need to be able to verbalize whatever it is you're offering in 5 minutes. And that brings me back to the first point, which you said about the networking, the atmosphere of just, the meeting people and talking. And many times I see that in the events that I participate here in the American Chamber and the Associação Comercial and other things. People just like to talk, but they're not very objective. What you do, it's hard for them to tell you or me what they do.
Yeah.
And like you said, they'd rather talk about the football game or that it's raining and, that the traffic is bad.
Yeah.
But, but tell me, please, what you do and what type of a company you relate to. And that's difficult. So for a foreigner coming... Yeah. here, it's frustrating.
It is. I mean, absolutely. Like, I'll give you the long story short about the 6 years that I've been in Denmark and why I joined this company today, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah. So, I when I moved to Denmark, I created that blog called denmarkbrazil.com and so on, and basically I started my own consulting practice where I started helping Danish companies to go to Brazil. And
right.
At first, it didn't matter the sector because I just wanted to survive pretty much. So I was looking for, I worked with logistics companies, a company called DSV.
Mm-hmm.
I brought some breweries, very specific types of, craft beers.
Mm-hmm.
What else? And then for some reason, more and more companies in the technology sphere, so to speak, started to ask for my support.
Right.
There was one company in special called Pixels. They were getting a lot of leads from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing post-production of imagery. So basically, if you have a website, you need to optimize the images, like white background and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they asked me to open an office in Brazil. We did that, and I was helping them prospecting for new business opportunities. We did well for some time. I hired also a country manager to be responsible for the operations. And then after they asked me to start doing the same in the UK. So basically, I realized that the same approach that I was using for Brazil, using LinkedIn and so on, worked in the UK and so on. Just to make the story, this long story short, I had a company till 4 months ago. Until last year, I had a company called Viasa, and we worked with a large multinational Brazilian company also in the commerce space called VTEX. Not sure if you heard. VTEX, they brought Obama last year to Brazil. They had this very large thing called VTEX Day. It's an event, massive event. Mariano Faria, who's the founder of VTEX, he made us an offer to buy us out. He offered us a bunch of money, but it was pretty much like a what do you call in English, an exchange of stocks, a trade of stocks. So I would have to trade the stocks from my company into his company and then get a salary. Right. I didn't agree with the terms. My partner at the time wanted to sell the company, but and then I had a bit of a stress crisis and so on. So I decided to join a company today. What we are doing is we are also an e-commerce platform, and my role is to develop the Dutch market. Yeah. So I'm a Brazilian living in Denmark, developing the Dutch market. So
that's the world today. The world today is exactly that. You don't have to be anywhere, but you have to be somewhere. And wherever you are, there's business and there's opportunities. And what I say and I believe, we're generating a podcast. I'm in Campinas, and you're not even in Odense today. You're in Aarhus. Because you're working. But what we need, what any company needs today is relationships, right? And connectivity. Right. And that connectivity is a technological connection like we're using and we're talking, but it's also a connectivity of the level, of the personal level. And that's mindset, that's understanding how business is made. And global business is basically what you just said. So it could be from Aarhus to Rotterdam. It could be to Scotland. It could be to Brazil. It could be to China. It could be to Thailand. It could be to Vietnam. It could be anywhere. Exactly. And today business is that way. And more platforms are becoming global. Back to our Brazilian conversation. And you are Brazilian. That's why I found you.
Perfect.
What makes it... Why is it the challenge for Brazilians to go out in the world? Because you've been there, you're up. But many companies and persons I know here, we talk about the global opportunities or relating to companies there, bringing companies here. There seems to be still a barrier. Is that because part of that is what you said? It takes more time to heat up, to get into the conversation, to understand.
Yeah, I think from the let's say the perspective, or from an international company standpoint, trying to enter the Brazilian market, and that's also when I think was a very interesting and hard learning, right? I was trying to, so the beer example, craft beer. I mean, it's such a hard business because it's actually not very difficult or challenging to find who's going to buy the beers from you.
Right.
In this very specific case. But there's so many hurdles, so many challenges to get the beer so first you will need the licenses. You will need the beers to you need to make like several lab sort of
all the different approvals and regulations and everything. Yeah,
exactly. For every label, you need approvals, and then that is time consuming. The Danes are not understanding why it takes so long, and then the beer get at the harbor, right?
Right.
And then I mean, there's a whole procedure that happens there. You never know if what's going to happen there at the harbor. There's taxation that is super complex.
Right.
Maybe there's, I think in that regard of corruption, things, when I sold beers, they went pretty smoothly, no corruption at all. But I mean, the beers, they would just stay at the harbor. And I mean, you're selling something that is, what do you call perishable, that can go often,
taxable,
right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the beers, they have like they have a specific time they have to be sold and put out on the shelf.
Right.
So that's one of the first challenges. Then the people who buy the beer, they also need to invest in marketing and tell the story behind the beer.
Right.
So for me that was the most challenging thing, like to get those guys to tell the story behind the beer.
Well, I'm laughing because on your the beginning of your LinkedIn profile, you actually show yourself as storytelling, right?
Yeah, somewhat.
I agree with you. The technical aspect of, let's say, producing beer is one thing. The marketing of anything, and it's not beer, it's everything. How do you tell the story? And who do you tell the story to? And that's the challenge. So that takes time to develop the story. Yeah.
And then I think, like, again, when we look at international companies looking to do business in Brazil, I think there's a whole set of opportunities in every field you imagine. But for me, like, I would look more at the technology aspect, right? I think when you look at the technology aspect and you want to enter Brazil, well, if you don't localize your operation, meaning that if you don't open an office in Brazil, I think things can get, you still can sell for Brazilian companies, but you're going to have some complications because companies want to pay locally. And what the Brazilian government does then is like to say, okay, you don't have a Brazilian bank account. So what we're going to do is to add up a 40% tax at the end of the price. It's sort of like to penalize you for not having an office in Brazil.
No, I think that's a basic point. I agree with you. It's essential to have a company established here. And that's not really different from many other countries. The same thing if you want to sell in the United States. If you're not there, if you don't have distribution there, people don't want to be the importer. They want to know where it is, and I think that's part of where the world is today in terms of logistics. Even with just-in-time everything, nobody wants to wait. You either have it, it's on the shelf, and I want it tomorrow. So you need to be able to do that. And obviously from Denmark or from New York or from China, that's generally not possible. You have to have things localized. So that's a tendency for anything today. So
I agree, but there's a company in special, and I'm doing no merchandising whatsoever. I just know that they're doing a great job. They're called eBank, and they're set to become, I think, one of they're also becoming a Brazilian unicorn.
right.
And basically, what they're doing is like they're localizing the payments without you having the need of like opening an office here. So they're working with Spotify and some very large technology companies.
No, that is the amazing thing about Brazil. You talk about the unicorns. There are many. I don't want to say daily, but when you talk about the fintechs, in my phone, I have a fintech bank account, credit card. It's all in my smartphone, and so that is happening. So there really is that dimension in Brazil of the traditional and the modern. But there are, I think the point to get across here, and this is what I want to make, is that there are literally thousands of opportunities in Brazil. Brazil is a big country. There's a lot happening. It's still an attraction to companies, but what needs to happen is what you just said. You have to find how to localize yourself and understand the cultural challenges. I'm talking this to really our foreign audience, of understanding of how to deal with Brazilians. There is that warm-up period, as you mentioned, right? The lighter conversation, the talking about things before getting to the business side. So it's essential that foreigners understand that. Whether they like it or not, it's another story, and that could be another podcast. But that's the way basically it is today. So, but with that, Carlos, we're coming to the end of our time, and I want to thank you for sharing your experience and understanding. But I also want to mention to our listeners that you have a series of articles and posts that you've placed, and some of them we're going to be back and we're going to be talking to you again about other subjects and other things that you've posted, because this intercultural and multicultural aspect is important for business persons anywhere, not only in Brazil. So having that understanding, I think, is important. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much, Tom.
And I want to thank you again for sharing your time with our listeners. And I want to advise everybody you can find more about Carlos Monteiro on LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, you'll find him at the / is Carlos A.A. Monteiro, Monteiro. All right? So find him there. Check out all of his articles. Connect to him, and I'm sure it's going to be helpful. I want to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market, and more about them on their site, which is focusmi.com. I'd also like to invite you to visit our website, talktobrazil.com. That's TALK, the number 2, BRAZIL.com. There you'll find our previous shows of Talk to Brazil. So remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Rioch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.